Greetings and salutations, Dopey Nation. I wanna take a walk around the world. I wonder would it do me any good? Until I get some money in my pocket, then I guess I'll just have to walk around my neighborhood. But I wanna be good so bad. I wanna be so good, so bad, so bad. I wanna be good so bad. But bad desire is all I ever had. And I wanna take a ride up in the sky and watch this aeroplane just pass me by. And I wanna see a Learjet liner take a dive just to show all of these people what it means to be alive. And I wanna be good so bad. I wanna be so good, so bad, so bad. I wanna be good so bad. But bad desire is all I ever had.
The best moment for me is Chris Roy says, TJ made this picture, and Liz says, what are those things? And Annie says, them's birds. And she said, no, not the birds, the other thing. And it's like, so thank you. I love that. I have to also say that I know you guys all know this, but it was around a year ago that I never went to Dopey Zoom, and the only Dopey Zoom that I could really go to was this one, because it was right when Susan is napping. And that's the other thing I wanted to say is that I loved it when Annie said, we've been shopping for papas. It's like the old Monty Python. You've been shopping now, been shopping. What'd you buy? A piston engine. What'd you buy? What are those for? What's a bargain? But anyway, it was about a year ago, and I wanted to come to the thing, but I didn't want to be seen. And you guys were having a costume party, and there are people in costumes, I believe. And I log in, and it says David Mannheim, and it's my face, and I have this whole idea that I'm anonymous and blah blah blah. So I closed the laptop in total fear, And Annie has been around Dopey for a while. And I've heard her voice a million times. And when she established the Dopey Birds, I have to say I was just overjoyed that there was a thing in England that was an outpost and it was real, and James, goddamn, James is the most committed, plucky, Dopey Birds defender, Dopey fucking contributor, cocky Cockney type. Funniest thing about James is he's got two accents. He's got his strange, creepy, proper voice, and then his real voice. And his real voice is the best. And the creepy, proper voice is very frightening. He tried to do a voicemail with the creepy, proper voice, and I was like, what is this? And then he started just giving me the real voice. And you guys, we need to record a lot of stuff with you guys and put it in the show because it adds a lot of value. Anyway, I'm going to move past being grateful to be on the Bird Show, but I am incredibly grateful to be on the Bird Zoom, and so happy that it's a year of you guys and that you guys have stuck with it, and also you guys never get to go to the Patreon Zoom, so it's the most important thing that we say, and maybe we should change the time of it from time to time, maybe because it's a great community thing. I think we could do an afternoon one. I mean, I'm down for that. But the thing that I said the last time we did it, and I really mean it, is that I wouldn't be surprised if the thing that got Dopey to the next place was just the Dopey Zoom, because the Dopey Zoom is the coolest thing in the world. That you guys do it, rain or shine, have nothing to do with me or Chris or whatever we're doing on the show. And that's the power, is the Dopey Zoom. So I'm grateful for you guys for doing it. It really means a lot to me. It really does. And it impresses me. It always impresses me when I hear stories and stuff. And I feel left out, but I also know that if I went, I would ruin it and hate it at the same time. So I'm not, I think our distance is mutually beneficial. Anyway, I'll just tell you guys have all heard my story, but you've heard it over the course of 5 years. So it's going to seem like, you've heard every bit, but I'll tell it anyway. My name is David. I'm an addict. And, I grew up in a middle class. There is no new shit, Jeremy. There's nothing. I think there's very little new shit. I think it's all old shit. But I grew up in a total middle class Jewish home in New York City, and my sister always says that we grew up in a kind of sitcom household, and I think that's definitely true for me because I was like basically raised by the television. Like whatever was happening in the house, I was totally raised by TV, and I learned very early on that no matter what I was doing, to lie about what I was actually doing. Like my mother was incredibly overprotective. So I always lied to do anything. Even if it was like going to my friend's house, I would lie about how I would get there. Or then as I started to do worse stuff, I would lie about everything. And my sister would always fight with my family. And I would always say to her, why are you fighting? Just do what you want and tell them what they want to hear. And that was like the beginning of my addictness, which was lying and trying to manipulate teachers and stuff. I went to this really, really good elementary school that only like a very small number of kids got in. Maybe 50 kids got in out of 10,000 when we were 4. And I stayed in that school from when I was 4 till when I was 18. And that basically protected me from my rampant addictness. Like I was safe in that place. And I think the first time I had a drink, I was probably 16 at a school dance, and we drank wine coolers in Central Park. And I loved being out of my head. I was always nervous, and I was always incredibly self-centered, like aware of how I fit in or if I was left out. Like that was all like very much dialed in. First time I got really drunk, I blacked out, and it was at a summer camp where I felt totally isolated and alone. Because I had grown up with the same friends. I had this group of friends, and I was with them from age 4 till age 17. So the second I got separated from them, I was lost. You know what I mean? Like they were like my drug. They made me feel safe. They gave me identity. And I went to work at a summer camp as a waiter, and I had no friends, and I got really depressed. And I remember I would lie on a hill all day, every day, and listen. Like when I wasn't waiting tables as a kid, and I was terrible as a kid, and I felt like such a fucking idiot all the time. And the last day of the summer, and I was friends with the English kitchen staff. So the last night of the summer, we all went to party, and I had never really drank. And I think I drank 17 screwdrivers or something, and I blacked out, and I spent the night vomiting on my friend who made sure I didn't die. Hi, Trevor. Hi, BB. Anyway, I kind of like didn't become an alcoholic or an addict for a long time. I did that one time. I remember driving home. It was the last night of the camp, and I remember driving home sick, like wretchedly hungover, and thinking that it was kind of a cool feeling because I was somebody. I wasn't protected. I wasn't this overprotected kid. I was actually going through something, and I kind of romanticized it immediately. And I wound up never drinking again, really, even though I go to a meeting every day and saying I'm an alcoholic. It just, the alcohol didn't mix for me. It made me literally sick, and it made me just disgusted. And years later, I got into, in sometime in high school when I got older, it was like a carnival day or something, and we went and we smoked pot. And I always thought that smoking pot was for suckers, and that they weren't like their true self because they were getting high. They were like posers. That's what I really thought, that people who smoke weed were posers, and people who drank were posers. That's how I was until I became a total drug addict. I was sure that anybody who did anything that wasn't honestly themselves, it was all bullshit, and they were just trying to be cool. But what I didn't understand is that everybody was really seeking comfort away from themselves through these things. And the second I smoked weed, I was like, I like this, but still I wasn't about to become a stoner. I was like living in middle-class Jewish life. It would be years later where I was a freshman in college. Maybe 2 years later, I was a freshman in college. And again, I had that exact same scenario of feeling totally isolated and left out. And I was depressed and isolated and left out. And I joined a band. And there was another Jewish guy in the band, this guitar player named Zev, and he was a stoner. And we were in a cultural anthropology class together. And I was like, aren't we? And we were studying for a test. And I was like, we're in college. Aren't we supposed to study high? Isn't that what you do in college? And I think from that day until I got sober, I smoked weed every day. And immediately I was like, this is how I want to feel. This is my new identity. It kept me from feeling socially anxious. It kept me, feeling comfortable, sleeping at night, not worrying. It was total self-medication through marijuana. And then once that door opened, I had always been just a crazy fan of rock and roll and art. And like I loved the idea of coolness, you know what I mean? And I knew that being cool could come through being a musician or just it became a whole thing, you know what I mean? Where I liked it, the identity. And all of a sudden I felt like I could be it. Like I had never thought I could be cool. And weed kind of was this thing that made me feel like I could be cool. And from there I was like, I think I actually had taken LSD before I smoked pot, which I'm just glossing over. I went to a Dead show with a friend of mine because I just wanted to have the experience. My friend was like, let's go see the Dead. And I was like, I thought the Dead was like some like devil worshiping heavy metal band. And I was like, I don't want to go see that. And we went, and I was like, he was like, maybe we could do acid. And I wasn't even thinking about it. I was like, okay. And there was some hippie guy and he was selling acid, and we bought 2 hits of white blotter acid at Madison Square Garden in 1990 or something. And we spent the night tripping on 27th Street, like watching pugs run by. And, we spent the Dead show just wandering around, tripping. And then we set up on the street outside my parents' building and just like talking about aliens and stuff. And it seemed like I can imagine like how people could do this. And it was nothing like being a drug addict, though. It was a night. It was fun with my friend. It was not what it would become, and the weed became an everyday thing. It became my identity. Then we would take acid whenever we could. Then it became clear that if I didn't have weed, I would show up where I knew other people would have it, and to make sure I was high that day, because I wouldn't miss a day. And then we started selling it. And again, we only sold it to have it. We didn't make any money. We just had bud. And then we started selling acid to have bud. And all the time I was playing music and stuff. But my whole thing was just to stay high on weed. You know what I mean? That's all I wanted to do. And I had so many dreams. I think back to college and stuff and all the stuff I didn't do that I could have done, but my primary focus was to stay high on bud, to have big bags with nuggets and like do that. And, when I was a kid, I had been an intern at MTV, and we had gotten on MTV when we were 17. And in the back of my head, I was just like, I can be famous. You know what I mean? I can do this. I know how to do this. And, when I went to college, I just put it in the back of my head. I was supposed to study television, and I didn't give a shit about television when I was getting high. So I became an art history major because I could handle smoking weed and staring at slides and hearing about art. And, the bud thing escalated, and I remember it was the last day of my second year of school, and there was this guy named John Pohl who was selling the best bud in school. He was selling the Silver Haze, and it was the first like name bud, and he got busted. So he had a pound of bud to give away. So me and my friends decided we were going to take the pound and sell it. And we went down to John Pohl's house, and we got this pound of weed, and we came back and we divvied it up into everybody got 4 ounces or something. And it was the last day of school. I was watching, I was writing this paper. I wound up writing the paper 3 times because my computer lost it. And then we were going down to our friend's house to give him the bud. And we're driving down there, and my friend had a pot plant in his trunk. I had a bong in my army jacket. Pocket. I had weed in this pocket, and a cop pulls us over because he didn't have the inspection sticker on his car, and basically we got arrested and suspended from school. And so I transferred to this art school without anybody knowing, without my parents knowing that we had gotten suspended, because the art school was free or cheap, and the school we went to was very expensive. And it was at the art school that the drugs really started becoming intense. And we just set up as acid dealers. We would buy acid and sell it. And we always had sheets and sheets of acid, and we always made money, and we always had a ton of bud. And I would take whatever kind of came around, but I pursued nothing besides weed and acid. Like, I started taking ecstasy, which I loved, but I didn't think I should be taking it. Mushrooms I would eat whenever we're around. Pills I never fucked with. And years later, I tried coke. But I kind of had this status quo. I fucking did my school, and I did my my life, and I was I didn't have any consequences from using drugs. I got through school in 4 years, and I got out of school. I got my parents put me on the waiting list for an apartment when I was 11 to get a low income apartment in our neighborhood, and I got it when I was 20 or 21. And I moved into this studio on 24th Street, and it was $300 a month. And my life was great. You know what I mean? Like, I took weird jobs. I had a job promoting cigarettes in East Hampton, and I had a job as a private eye, and I was hired to look for drugs at the Limelight and the Tunnel. And like, I was just doing whatever, and there were no consequences. And then we started doing coke. And still I fucking hated the coke. And I had a girlfriend. I had a long-term girlfriend, and the girlfriend broke up with me, and I was crippled. Like, I was fucking crippled from that. And Todd, who I was getting high with in Ithaca, and that was the first college I went to, he was like, "Why don't I move in with you?" And I was like, "Okay." I was like, "That's a good idea." I was like, "You move in, you don't have to pay rent. You just have to provide bud and drugs for our house." And he moved in, and he got a job immediately delivering weed, being one of these weed delivery guys around Manhattan. And he immediately got hooked into the coke world. And I didn't love the coke, so I could take it or leave it. And I got hired to work in TV production, which is what I always wanted to do. And I started being a production assistant, and I worked on this college talk show. And they would fly me around the country to set up audiences for this talk show. And Todd would stay in our apartment when I would go travel. And I came home one night, and everybody from my art school was there because we had the coke hookup. We had this kid that would come over and deliver drugs. And, I've told this story a billion times, but I still remember it so well that when I came home from the airport, first of all, like, the whole time I had, nuggets with me on the trip, and I smoked pot with everybody I met. And that was all it was. Like, I could keep that life very manageable. When I came home from the trip, all these kids were in my house, and all of a sudden that kind of feeling like, what's in it for me, the self-seeking feeling popped up. And I'm like, this drug dealer is going to make all this money off these kids. And Todd has all these people in my house, and I'm left out. Like, and that's kind of a perennial feeling that always kind of drove me, this feeling left out. And it's funny, like, because I demanded that the drug dealer give us something for hooking us up, and he gave us heroin. And I had tried it in college the one time, and it was nothing. You know what I mean? I got fucked up on it, and I was like, I'm never going to do it again. But I think my life had more of a, I don't know, I felt so much freedom. and I felt like I could handle whatever was coming my way. So when I sniffed the dope, I liked it. And I saw it that this was a tool, you know, that I could use this to manage my anxiety, you know, and, but still I was wary. I knew that I would get strung out. So I was wary, and Todd would push us to get the dope. And I remember this so well that, if it was more than 3 times in a week, and he would bring his friends to my apartment, and I hated his friends. So I would jump into the loft bed and I would say, I'm going to pretend I'm asleep. Wake me up when your loser friends leave. And then I would fall asleep, and I'd wake up the next day and I wouldn't have used. And that went on for like a year, and I would use once a week, twice a week. And it was, again, still manageable. And my career was picking up. I started being on camera at the TV place. And as my career picked up, I think my heroin use picked up, and then we stopped. We stopped using because Todd and Jeremy got habits, and they got scared. So they packed up and they moved to LA, and I was like, fuck it. I was alone. My job had turned into from a PA job to a good job. Like, I was making a lot of money, and I wasn't on heroin, and maybe I went into withdrawal. I didn't even think about it. And I just worked. And then one night, these friends of mine came in to go to this rave, and we all took ecstasy, and we went to this rave, and I hooked up with this girl, and the girl was a heroin addict. And in the morning, we were talking about heroin addicts and how we wish we had been on heroin instead of the ecstasy. And the girl kind of moved into my apartment, and it was just bang. You know, at that moment, I was just like, it was happening. You know what I mean? And before I knew it, I had a habit. And before I knew I had a habit, the girl was like, we need to go to the methadone clinic now. And I was like, what's happening? And then all of a sudden, it was my identity without even like signing up for it, really. I just loved how the heroin made me feel. It made me feel safe. It made me feel like I didn't have to give a shit when I gave a shit about everything all the time. And all of a sudden, I'm with this girl who I didn't really like. I was very attracted to her. But I was wary of her because I had just gotten hurt from the other girl. And I had a methadone habit and a heroin habit. And she asked me if she could actually move into my apartment. And I was like, no. She left. My heroin escalated. I was making more money. I signed a contract for like 80 grand. And I signed a 3-year deal and 80 grand doesn't sound like a lot of money now, but when I was 23 and I was paying $300 a month, $80,000 was so much money. And they gave me like a $10,000 signing bonus, and I felt like I was somebody. And they gave me a 3-year deal, and I didn't make it out of the first year. I spent every cent of the $80,000 on heroin. I was broke. And then it came to that moment where I was sick all the time. I could not keep up with it. And I had this great job. You know, I was interviewing rock stars, and I was making a TV show, and I was doing exactly what I had always wanted. And, but the heroin, like, first of all, it made me a dick. You know, it made me more arrogant than I already was. You know, like, it's like, I heard somebody speak at a meeting yesterday talking about the egomaniac with the inferiority complex. And I knew that I was the greatest thing, except that I was worse than everybody else, you know, and like, that's such a terrible combination to have, which I think is our thing. Or Chris would always say, the piece of shit at the center of the universe, you know? And I remember I got to the point where I would be sick every day at work. I would be waiting for the dealer every day at work. I'd be manipulating my parents or my friends or my job to give me money to stave off me getting sick, until finally I had to go to detox. And it was one of the most important decisions I ever made, which was, do I tell my work or do I tell my parents? And I don't know why I chose to tell my parents, because if I had told my work, they would have had to send me to rehab. You know, I was full time. You know what I mean? Like, instead I told my parents, and work fired me because I was in breach of contract. They were looking for a way to fire me. And then they had a way. And from then it was like then it was on. You know what I mean? The second I went to detox, I went to Beth Israel free detox in Manhattan, surrounded by scary, scary, scary drug addicts. And I was a very precious, 24-year-old Jewish boy, who was not used to scary shit. And I was thinking, oh, this is interesting. You know what I mean? I was still thinking like it was a book or it was a movie or this was interesting. And I didn't realize what was really happening. You know what I mean? I left. I remember I talked to the counselor there and she was like, oh, you'll be fine. She was like, I could see you getting sober right away. And when I heard her say that, all I could think was, I can still use safely. I can get away with this. And I remember I left that place. I got high the day I left. You know what I mean? Like, I think I still had dope in my house, or I had money, or it was easy, and from then, it just was the pits. I got maximum unemployment. I stayed exactly the same way. And I went, kind of like every X amount of time I would be in detox. I had one more really good job between detoxes where I got hired by MTV2 to make a proper show. And I wound up, I directed Jason Schwartzman, high on heroin, like biggest mess in the world. It was like daylight saving. He's an actor. He was in Rushmore and a bunch of movies. It doesn't matter. He's actually, if you've ever seen Rocky, he was Adrian. You ever seen Rocky? The woman in Rocky, Adrian, it was his son. But he's a famous American actor. You never saw Rushmore? You never saw Darjeeling Limited? Spawn? He's a famous, he was on some great TV show on HBO. I don't remember. It doesn't matter. He's a famous American actor. I was very impressed with myself that I was directing. And it was a mess, total mess. And then just, I fell apart, you know what I mean? Like total destitution. And I signed up with another methadone clinic. Only now it was becoming obvious that I wasn't like this successful producer guy who was kind of slumming. I was this guy who wasn't going to get back up. It kind of, in the back of my head, I was like, I can get back up, but I wasn't getting up. It was amazing. That transformation from somebody who thought they were glamorous using heroin and cool, like I thought I was Miles Davis or John Lennon or something. And then it turned out I was more like a rich kid fucking around. But then that turned into like, I'm nothing. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just a junkie. I'm just a drug addict and I don't have a chance. And from there, it went into cataclysmic free fall. And I could not get it together. My parents sent me to outpatient and I would use after every meeting. I did not take it seriously. I didn't understand. I was so addicted that I couldn't stop using. And I was in the outpatient using every day. I was in the methadone clinic copping every day afterwards. Every turn was, how could I get a pile of money to spend on drugs? How could I get someone else to give me money to pay my rent? And my parents were paying my rent for a long time in the outpatient and paying for the outpatient until the outpatient was like, he's got to go to inpatient. And they got me a deal, a scholarship to a rehab in Delray Beach, Florida. And it was like, either I was going to go to rehab on Long Island or I was going to go to rehab in Delray Beach. And we took the better deal. I think they charged us a third because even though I was this quote unquote rich kid, heroin addict, my parents were teachers and didn't have any money. I just wasn't like fucking totally, debauched, whatever. So like I went to this place in Florida, brought a shitload of weed. I had already also adopted a pill habit, through one of my favorite stories was there was this old junkie guy that I hooked up with in the city who called himself the Professor. He was a printmaking professor in Brooklyn College, and this other heroin dealer named Tony Baloney. I moved him into my apartment, and the Professor would come over to cop from Tony Baloney, and the Professor brought like thousands of Klonopins and Xanax. And I traded every piece of camera equipment I had to him for his pills. And so by the time I went to treatment, I was totally addicted to benzos and I was seizing all the time. I was having seizure after seizure after seizure. And again, I didn't think it wasn't normal. I didn't realize that this was a low. Like, I just thought this was the cost of doing business. And I didn't realize like what was happening. And, I tried to get clean in Florida, and I stopped using, and, but I didn't want to be sober. You know, that's the real thing, is I didn't want to be clean and sober. I wasn't done using. I wanted to keep using. And I always wanted to keep using. Like, I never wanted to stop. I think I was scared of my quote unquote genuine self. I was scared of being myself. And, you know, I wound up at a halfway house in Florida, and I saw some hippie at a 7-Eleven, and I was like, can you get me buds? And he was like, yeah. So I'm smoking weed in the halfway house and just getting ready to go home. And my parents gave up my apartment. You know, that was an 11-year wait list to get a studio apartment in Manhattan. And the counselor told my parents to stop paying the $300 a month, which she should have. And they stopped paying, which they should have. But I was devastated, and I didn't think I'd ever get back to New York because it was so expensive and I had nothing. So I decided what I was going to do was move to Los Angeles and move in with Todd and Jeremy. They had a house in North Hollywood, and they weren't doing heroin. But I was such a fucking drug addict, and so was Todd. But Todd didn't. Todd, so funny or sad, because Todd always thought I was this terrible addict and he was a functional addict. And in a lot of ways he was. You know, he didn't get heroin habits the way I did. So when I moved out to California, it was on, are we talking Jeremy Turner? I don't know. No, not right now. But he's here, I think. Maybe he left. I'm sorry if I'm rambling. He basically, I moved to California, and because I figured I could get back into television, and they told me, Jeremy and Todd promised me that we weren't going to do drugs, but of course they were smoking weed, and I didn't want to stop doing drugs. And when I got there, Todd had started doing crystal meth, and basically, I wanted to do it immediately, you know, and he wanted to protect me from it or whatever. And I started smoking meth with him. And the second I put meth into my lungs, I wanted pills, and I really wanted heroin. And the second, I think I spent 5 days or something high on meth, and I was like, we got to drive to Mexico. And me and Todd like drove to Mexico and bought every pill we could buy. And I remember he taped it to his leg, like, for whatever reason. He could have put it in his pockets, but he like taped it into his groin. And when we were going through the customs, he's sweating and the fucking tape is coming off. And it was like this very anxious, classic Todd moment. And we didn't get caught. We had all these pills. And my girlfriend at the time, I left out a lot of things, but whatever. Just trying to eyes on the prize here. Basically, the second I was doing meth, I started doing heroin, and I tried to keep jobs together out there, and I couldn't. And my girlfriend, well, this is important, I guess. I left out a very important detail, which was one of my best friends in elementary school had this girlfriend, and he would travel, and the girlfriend was this stoner, and she would come visit me in New York. And eventually we wound up hooking up. And I decided I was in love with her, and I decided that she couldn't go back to him. And so she broke up with him, and this was probably my oldest friend. And when that happened, I knew that I had crossed a line that I couldn't live with. You know what I mean? And I had this shame around that. I betrayed my best friend, and I brought this woman into it, and it went fucking total sideways. You know, like, it went as bad as anything could have gone. And then from there on, I just was medicating that shame. Like, and I mean, and then I think it was another 10 years before I saw the light of day. I remember just taking pills by the handful. She had seizures. She wound up in the hospital. My friend Dave came down to see her, and me and him had this conversation, and I broke his heart, and he was like my brother. So like from then on, it was like my drug taking was total running from this thing, and also being the most selfish person in the world, that I couldn't live with the fact that she would be with him and we cheated and lied. I needed that to be out in the open, but it was just the worst. And that's when things got really bad in LA, which was every cent I had. I think I had 10 grand I got back from the apartment. The 10 grand bonus I had put into the apartment as security. So I got it back when I left the apartment, and I spent every cent of it on drugs in LA, and I couldn't pay the rent. And they moved me into the garage because I wasn't paying rent. And the garage was like 100 degrees in North Hollywood. And like, we would just steal shit and sell it. And I got on methadone out there, and it just was one thing after the other. And then that girl came and she rescued me, and she got us an apartment, and I lived with her in Echo Park for 5 years. And I don't think I had a job. I think the only job I had was being Big Bird at children's parties. And I had another job, like being like taking care of some autistic kid, where I was like the autistic kid. And it was as ugly as you could imagine. And then I got a phone call from my mother that she had gotten leukemia, and that she was going to die. And that's when I realized that things had gotten out of control. You know, I was in Los Angeles. I was on 150 milligrams of methadone. I was taking 10 milligrams of Klonopin every day. I was working in a weed dispensary, smoking as much bud as I could get. That job, they would just trade me bud for being the security guard in a weed dispensary, which was a funny, stupid job. And but when I found out that my mother had leukemia, I knew that I had to get off of methadone, and I knew I had to get back east before she died. So I started detoxing off the methadone. I think it took me like 10 months to wean off the methadone, and then I went to detox, and then I got really sick. And I think about a month later, we flew to Burlington, Vermont, and me and my girlfriend at the time lived in Burlington, Vermont for probably a month. And I realized that I couldn't be with her, like, because I was off of drugs, and I was like, I couldn't live with it. My mother was dying, and it became very heavy and scary. And I went to a meeting, and I was like, I just didn't do anything for me. And I basically ruined her life. My best friend, who she had been with, wound up becoming a doctor. She like got dragged back and forth across the country to like take care of me, this totally self-centered, selfish drug addict. And I was leaving her to be alone in Burlington, Vermont. And I moved to Manhattan, and I had worked at Katz's when I was in high school. And I had asked my cousin owned half of Katz's, and I asked my cousin to let me work there. And he said, okay. And I moved into my friend Jim's mother's house, and I worked at Katz's, and broke up with Jenny, and Jesus Christ, tried to get my shit together and tried to be in my mother's life. And I kept smoking weed, and my mother was dying. And I remember, like, we would visit, and she would tell me I'm going to die soon. And like, my dad didn't know, and my sister didn't know, but I knew. And I mean, like, I'm so grateful that I went back to be with her, because if I hadn't, I wouldn't be able to live with it. And I wound up meeting Linda very shortly after that. And it was the second time we had met. We had met years before in that apartment, but we hadn't seen each other again. We dated my mother died. My mother died, and I met Linda 2 weeks later, and we started dating. And I was just smoking weed, but I wasn't sober. I was smoking weed. I was not near recovery. And 6 months later, Linda was pregnant. And somehow I fell back in with Todd in New York. And somehow after Linda got pregnant, he decided he wanted to get high on heroin with me. And for some reason, I said that was a good idea. And I didn't get a habit. But from there, he hooked me up with one of his benzo dealers. And I remember as we got closer and closer and closer to the birth of Nora, my heroin habit grew again, and it came back. And we wound up going to live birth classes, and I had drugs in my pocket. And it's so funny, like, to go over everything. I never go over everything at once. So I'm very it's not going to be a good recording. So I apologize for anybody who has to listen to this in the future. But basically, I was using, after Nora came home from the hospital. Nora was born with hip dysplasia, and me and Linda were not suited for each other. We didn't know each other. We weren't suited to be parents. The whole thing was a fucking train wreck. And I did what I always did, which was I used, and she caught me, and then she left. And that's when I started to see who I really was, which was just this drug addict who wasn't good for anybody. All I cared about was using. And it took me so long to see myself, but I really started to see myself when I would visit Nora, and I needed to be supervised. And I would just beg to let her keep me on weed, even though I was using heroin. I wasn't like, let me do heroin. I was like, let me do weed. And finally, it's crazy. I remember I went out one night and I was walking home, and I walked into a wall, and I broke my nose, and I got a black eye, and I went out to see Linda, and she's like, you look so fucked up. You need to do something. And that's when I went to Mountainside. And I went to Mountainside, and I met Chris at Mountainside, and I knew I needed to get sober, but I still didn't want to. Like, I didn't want to get sober. I didn't want Nora to have a drug addict father. I just didn't want to not be a drug addict. I wanted to use. I wanted to stay high. I wanted to be a kid more than anything. And when I came home, I used. And then it became very clear that I wasn't going to get custody of Nora if I didn't have 18 months on a hair follicle test. So I started going to Narcotics Anonymous and really white knuckling it. And I didn't work steps, but I went to a meeting every day, and I tried to infuse my life with busyness to get distracted. And I didn't do drugs for 18 months, but every day I wanted to. Every day I was like, I wish I could smoke weed. I wish I could smoke weed. I wish I could smoke weed. With heroin being a distant thing. I wound up drinking, dating, and drinking when I would date. And then after I started drinking, I realized I couldn't claim sobriety in Narcotics Anonymous, even though I wouldn't drink alcoholically. I'd have a drink on a date, so I could feel like I was okay. You know what I mean? Like I could talk to somebody or whatever. And then I kind of like, I think it was Hurricane Sandy, and I was with some people, and I was like, fuck it, I could smoke pot. And I started smoking pot again. And I started smoking pot every day immediately. I took one hit, and I was like, I'm smoking pot every day. And I smoked pot every day. And still through the whole thing, I was begging Linda to come back to me, to let me be a family with them every day. And she was dating people, and I was dating people. And I didn't want sobriety. I didn't care. I was like, I could finally be a pothead, and I don't have to do heroin ever again. But I started dating someone who had pills, and she would give me pills once a month, like a bunch of pills. And I would take them every day until they were gone. And then I'd stave it off until I saw her the next month. And, but then one time she gave me a bunch of Percocets, and I was like, oh, I really like how that feels. I wouldn't mind getting a little bit of dope. And I called this dealer, and he came over, and I shot a bunch of dope, and it fucked me up so bad. And I was like, I don't want to do that anymore. Like, I was like, I could not get acclimated to the heroin again. And I was like, that's interesting, but I still like the benzos, and I still like the pills. And I was wearing Linda down. I was always like, let's just make it work. Nora's 4. We can still get back together. It can still be a family. And she was like, okay, let's give it a shot. And me and her and Nora went to a farm in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And Linda will take little bits of Xanax here and there to help her sleep when she sleeps in a weird place or whatever. And I knew it. And I stole her Xanax on the trip, which was just incredibly stupid. And she got so pissed. And she's like, it's not happening. We're not getting back together. And then it was done. And I kept begging her and begging her and begging her until finally she was like, okay, I'll do it. And she came over and like, we went to see the Amy, I'm going to say Amy Dresner, but no, Amy Weinhardt documentary. And I had already developed a benzo habit at that point. And when we came home, I like ordered tacos and passed out before the tacos. Yeah, that's what I said. Winehouse, right? I think it was, I didn't say Winehouse? Amy Winehouse. What did I say? Nothing? Doesn't matter. I said Weinhardt. Yeah, Amy Weinhardt. She was another soul singer from America. She was like the pre-Amy Winehouse. Amy Winehouse. You never heard of Amy Weinhardt? She was the Jewish girl from Great Neck. She's great. I'm just kidding. It was Amy Winehouse. I was wrong. I'm just nervous telling this story. Forgive me. So she found out that I was on drugs, and she took away custody, and I was miserable. And again, I found myself in that place of begging her to let me smoke pot so I could have a good life. And it was August 15th of 2015. And I'm like writing an email and I'm like, please let me smoke weed. I can be a good dad. I could be a good partner if you just let me smoke weed. And I remember I was sweating and chain smoking Marlboros and typing. And I saw myself and I was like, what am I? I was 41. I was like, what am I begging for? How can this be what I'm begging for? You know, like, and then all of a sudden I was like, well, maybe I don't have to smoke weed. You know, like maybe I can have a different life. And I went to an AA meeting the next day, still not convinced that I was going to be sober. Like, why would I have been convinced? I never had any time. The only time I had was just to get past the hair test. And I never found sobriety. And I went to AA and there was a kid there who was 28, celebrating 10 years or something. Beautiful, you know, fit guy with fucking tattoo sleeves. And I'm like, who the fuck is this guy? 10 years. And I went up to him just to tell him how much I resented him after the meeting. And he told me how, he asked me if today was going to be my first day. And I didn't even think that was possible, you know? So I said, maybe it is, you know? And I went home and I called my friend Devin and I was like, do you want all my bud? I had fucking bud in my cabinets. I had strains. I was dating a weed dealer who would bring me bud from Colorado and edibles from Colorado and vape pens and all this shit. And I gave it all to Devin and I was like, I'm going to try this. And the next morning I went to a 7:30 meeting and it met 7 days a week. And I told them my story and they were like, we want you to come back. And no one had ever said, we want you to come back. And I was like, okay, I'll come back. Cause I always got up early. I was always an early riser. And I went back to that meeting every day. And I had never been to AA. I had never known how AA worked. I had never heard, like, rarely have we seen someone thoroughly do this. I never heard promises. I was like, okay, there's promises. And I always thought that was bullshit. You know, like the idea that there could be promises sounded like the biggest Christian bullshit in the world to me. But I was hopeless and I was desperate as fucking hell. And I was like, I never did anything thoroughly. The only thing I did thoroughly was use. You know, I used incredibly thoroughly and I left no stone unturned in my using. I could not tolerate getting sick. I could not tolerate being broke. I could not tolerate going into withdrawal, which is why I was on methadone constantly, because I wouldn't fucking go through withdrawal. So when I heard, rarely have we seen someone thoroughly do this, I realized I had never thoroughly done a thing in my life. And like, what a concept that would be to thoroughly try to accomplish something. And I was like, I'm going to try this and see if I can do it. And which was exciting. You know what I mean? Like all the dreams I had of being a TV this or what, a musician or whatever, I never thoroughly tried to do a fucking thing. So I went to that meeting every day. This weird dude asked me if I would let him sponsor me. And I was like, how quickly can you take me through the steps? Because I had never done 12 steps. And he's like, I could take you through the 12 steps in a year. And I was like, let's do it. And he was a weirdo. you know, and I met with him every week and I wrote out long first, second, and third steps. And I didn't like him. Like if I had a problem, I would call him and he'd tell me to call somebody else. I'd be like, what the fuck? I was like, this is the worst sponsor ever. And then God did for me what I could never do for myself, which is he relapsed. He relapsed on Percocet. And I was like, this is the greatest thing that ever happened. This fucking guy relapsed. And I found this other sponsor. He was an old Jewish guy who I really liked. And I really struggled with higher power stuff. Even though I wanted higher power stuff, I struggled with it. And I didn't know exactly, like I didn't have God. Like I didn't have like God, like a real God. I liked the universe concept, but I didn't really understand it. I couldn't really get into it. And I liked the group of drug addicts or the group of drunk concept, but I couldn't really give myself to it. But then he said, do you have a gift of desperation? And I was as desperate as I could have ever been. You know, I had a gift of desperation. And he said, well, just use that. And I could, you know, I thought it was very clever. G-O-D, gift of desperation. I was desperate. All I wanted to be was better. And I did that. And right around then, I had tried to, when I was smoking weed, I had made this web series called The Last Jewish Waiter, and it got a bunch of attention. And Chris would show up in my life here and there. Like we were never tight. He would call me every few months. If he ever had a new girlfriend, he'd bring them down to Katz's to impress me and to impress the girlfriend that he knew somebody at Katz's. I don't know. That was how Chris was. And he was like, yo, this Last Jewish Waiter thing could really be something. And I was like, it's already done. It's not going to be anything. I fucked it up. Like I fucked that shit up bad, you know, in my addict brain. And he was like, well, that could have been something. He's like, I want to do something. And I was like, well, you can't do anything. I was like, you can't do anything. You're not going to do anything. And then I remembered that I had this friend in LA who had the idea of doing a podcast about drug stories. And I said, Chris, you know, we could do this podcast about drug stories. And he's like, okay. He's like, what do we have to do? And I was like, just come to my apartment and we'll just do it, you know? And he came to my apartment and I had 4 months clean and he had 2 years clean, and give or take on both of those. And we recorded the show. And Chris, you know, became just an incredible sober support for me because he had 2 years and he was the worst addict I had ever known. And how did he have 2 years? And I would make him crazy with my obsession about my family. It wasn't about using. It was about my life isn't the way I want it to be, you know? And I finally let go of it. I was finally like, I'm giving up. You know, I can't fix anybody else. I can't make Linda do something. I can't make things happen the way I want it to happen, but I can practice these principles on all my affairs. I can do the next right thing. I can give myself over to the care of a higher power. I can be willing to do this stuff. And that's when I realized that if I could be willing to thoroughly follow the path, the promises could come true, even though that still sounds like malarkey when I say it out loud. But it kind of just crystallized as I did it. And it wasn't, I think probably the week I gave up on the idea that that I needed my family to get back together, Linda invited me out. Like, I think that week, the second I gave it up, it came together. And then I just fucking went hardcore into the program and I did everything that I could do and I worked the steps and I called my sponsor every day and I just did my very best. And that didn't last, you know, but I did my best as long as I could. And then obviously me and Linda got back together and we had a baby and fucking Chris died. And, you know, I found myself out of the program. But every time shit got bad, I kind of knew what the tools were to make shit okay, which was double down on the program, you know, do more work, you know, and I still I called my sponsor the other day complaining, like, cause I'm always upset that Dopey isn't bigger, that I don't have more money, that I don't like my job. And it's all about like acceptance, accepting where I am today so that tomorrow can be good, or at least what it is. Because like my life is a billion times better than it ever has been. I have so many incredible things in my life, and I have joy. You know what I mean? Like, and like when I fuck up, I don't fuck up with substances, but I fuck up with selfishness, and I fuck up with being a dick and being arrogant and not being cool to Linda, So every morning I pray for Linda. Every morning I pray, whoever is making me crazy, I pray for them, because the resentments prime me away from being spiritual. And I know that the solution to this thing is to be spiritual. And I don't like saying it's God, 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 but it's me. It's not me. You know what I mean? It's not me. And the more I can pry myself away from my own ego, the better my life is. And I know that I went on way too long and talked about a lot of stuff that didn't make any sense, but I'm very, very grateful to have been invited to share my story with you guys. And I'm sorry that it went so far off course, but thank you.
I wanna take a walk around the world. I wonder would it do me any good? Until I get some money in my pocket, then I guess I'll just have to walk around my neighborhood. But I wanna be good so bad. I wanna be so good, so bad, so bad. I wanna be good so bad. But bad desires all